welcome to Taxpayer Alert. I'm Al Segalla. I'll be your host for this program. Also, I'm president of the Calaveras County Taxpayer Association, and we always have interesting and informative guests. This is no exception. Our guest this time is Supervisor Dennis Mills, who is former board member of the CCWD and an old expert on water. We're going to learn a lot about water. Dennis, welcome.
How you doing?
Dennis, tell us a little bit about your experience with water going back over the 10 years or so.
Well, it isn't even 10 years. I'd have to go back to 1978 and 79, 80 during the fight for the Stanislaus and remove it, keeping the wild and scenic off the Stanislaus.
I remember that.
Filling the dam. I was executive secretary of Fill the Dam back then. We were successful, and in 1982, the whole issue was resolved, as you know, with a wet year.
And we got a wonderful lake, that wonderful recreation and all kinds of water for grow crops in the valley, and no more floods. It's just a tremendously good thing that happened. But even with all the goodness that this did, it was violently opposed by those of the left.
That's correct. In fact, there was even my Proposition 17 in 1974 to limit the filling of new Maloney's. But think if it hadn't been filled in 1982 and the amount of damage that could have occurred to the cities of Oakdale, Manteca, Tracy, and Riverbank. It has done its job.
I wonder if we could make the anti-dam people pay for the damage caused by flooding if their advice is adhered to.
Wow. Okay.
That would not be fair taxation, probably.
Probably not.
And we can't shame them to do it. They won't volunteer the money to pay for the damages.
No.
Okay.
So then we move on, of course, to CCWD and the time spent there. But water has continued to be an issue. I'm part of LAFCO as well, Local Agency Formation Commission. I know we do acronyms all the time as government people, so pardon us. I mean, if I say an acronym and you don't understand it, please correct me. But even at LAFCO, there was a discussion about what is going to be the county's role in water going forward, and we have to really take a very close look at it. So Brian Moss has been given that assignment through the CAO's office to kind of be on top of water. So no matter who comes and goes from the board level, there is an institutional knowledge that's going to remain. And so I'm involved with the SIGMA, which is the Eastern San Joaquin Groundwater Basin Authority, which is working on trying to stop the overdrafting in the valley, but also working with Mountain County's Water Resource Association as part of their executive committee, and being sure that we have a common voice here in the foothills as to how we're representing water.
The SIGMA, SGMA.
Yes.
It's pronounced SIGMA.
So that's the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act.
Okay.
And from that act, there was a requirement that we stop the overdrafting in the San Joaquin Valley.
Okay.
And unfortunately, part of that valley does touch the 70 square mile area of our communities over near Valley Springs. And so we're in it whether we like it or not. And that means CCWD's in it, the county's in it, and so is Valley Springs. And there's a little area called Rock Creek Water District down there, and it's actually in Stan County. So we've gathered together Stanislaus County, Calaveras County, Rock Creek, and CCWD into what's called the East Side GSA, just to represent our little corner of the world as to how we're going to respond to these requirements.
Okay. Would this organization, would LAFCO form this organization?
No, it's already been put together as a JPA, encompassing all of the water agencies and all the responsible parties, both in San Joaquin County, part of Stanislaus County, and Calaveras County.
Would that include the counties as well?
That includes the counties as well. There's no escaping the long arm of the law when it comes to this issue.
Well, I'm thinking in terms of having more voice to protect private property rights.
Yes, by 2020, we have to have a plan in place, and right now we are on track. We meet once a month down in Stockton to discuss that track, and we are seeking public input right now, and anybody that's wanting to provide public input, please do so on our the website for the San Joaquin GSA, Groundwater Sustainability Authority.
What types of regulations on wells are they contemplating?
Currently, there are no regulations on private wells. However, I do see that that's going to be coming, especially in the valley. And that's going to be a fight because there's no constitutional authority for the state to take anything other than surface water authority.
Now, the state has claimed ownership of all water in the state. I assume they're not including federal lands. So this doesn't seem to be, that's like claiming ownership of all human beings. How do you handle that? If the state is going to be responsible for water, are they going to be responsible for my well water or my rainwater, for my gutters? How does the state exercise ownership responsibility? And can it really constitutionally claim ownership of water?
That they have the right under the Constitution to control surface water, but they do not have that right in groundwater. And so how they're getting around that is by taking surface water and pumping it into the ground, what's called a conjunctive use, which means that even though it's pumped into the ground, it never is groundwater. It's always surface water, but it's stored in the ground. So it's kind of a little glitch in the way they want to look at it.
I see. So if we want to increase the groundwater, we need to increase percolation and divert some of the surface runoff that would go out to the ocean into the ground to raise the groundwater. Does that make sense?
It's interesting you're going there because I did do a forest tour at the request of Congressman McClintock with Vicki Christensen, the new head of the U.S. Forest Service, back in May. And we went out onto the Stanislaus Forest and looked at plots of ground that in some cases have been being monitored for nearly 100 years.
Wow.
And they found that on those plots where they were able to control the density of the forest to 130 trees of 6 inches and better per acre, they were able to achieve an additional 5% plus of water coming off of those plots.
That's because the snow melt hit the ground rather than up in the trees where it melts away.
Correct. It's not trans-evaporated. So the result is that they already know. So the congressman said, so what is it costing us to do that? And the response was, in these plots, it's a break even. So the amount of timber they sold and the amount of revenue that they generated from it was a break even. And his question to Vicki Christensen was, why don't we do more of that?
Makes sense.
Exactly.
What was the answer?
It was a stone cold silence for a while. One of the problems has to do with NEPA. That's the National Environmental Protection Act, and that's also the environmental assessments that are being currently required on the federal forests. When you look at how much time and effort goes into a timber sale or taking care of a particular plot of ground, the amount of paperwork can be years in the making and literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, I mean like in some cases 800 pages of documentation. What they're trying to do now is bring it down to, if we know what we want the forest to look like, let's just give them the marching orders to go do that and go to work.
Them being who?
The Forest Service or the private contractors who do the work. Right now, 25% of all the cost of a timber sale is spent on a forester running around with a can of paint marking a tree.
Right.
Well, why? If you tell the forester that this is the standard, they should be able to monitor the progress of the thinning and the fields. We're not talking clear cutting here. We're simply talking about mastication, getting rid of the underbrush, the understory, getting rid of the fuel ladder, and bringing it back to some state of a reasonable forest.
I wonder if the word clear cutting is a derogatory way of identifying even-aged harvesting. Even-aged harvesting is supposed to be the highest level of forestry, and the best that forestry science has come up with. From I was a director of the chamber and chair of its government affairs committee, and we reviewed the Forest Service in Calaveras County, and they made a presentation to us showing exactly what it was. The word clear cutting is an evil word, and when you mention clear cutting, oh, that's terrible, because we're taught that that's terrible.
But we're not doing that. A good example is the types of fuel thinning projects. You can go above Dorrington right now now, and along the highway you can see what those thinning projects look like. That is the result. That is what they're doing in the Pumpkin Hollow project, the Cabbage Patch project through the Upper McCollum Watershed Authority. There are many ways that we can do this. I want to get a master stewardship agreement in Calaveras County, much like Tuolumne County has. But we're looking for a sponsor. We're looking for somebody to administer. That allows us, through a hug, if you will, to go on to federal land using state and local dollars to help to thin those forests and to provide the fuel breaks that are so critical to protect our infrastructure.
Oh, for sure. We need the fuel breaks. But the thinning, sometimes referred to selective harvesting, this has been the standard practice for many, many years. And the worst forest fires we've had is in the areas of selected harvesting.
That's correct.
That's because there's just not enough tax money. There is no money in the product to pay for the work of removing the fuels, unless you have harvesting valuable timber, marketable timber. Well, under the plan of even-age harvesting, some people call it clear cutting, but we want to stick with even-age harvesting. Your trees, they know scientifically how far apart the trees should be to provide the maximum water absorption from the ground so the tree be healthier and be able to fight off the bugs. The bug trees are caused by drought and not having enough water for the sap.
Sure.
Okay, when they have normal healthy sap, they're not susceptible to the bugs like they would be when the forest is neglected.
I'll give you an example to forestry practices. Is what Pickering did in the Middle Fork of the Stanislaus in the 20s and 30s is still a good practice today. But if you look at the Donalds fire that just occurred, everybody says, well, that was in Tuolumne County. But the point is it affected the ranchers of Calaveras County that live in Angels Camp and Copperopolis. They were the ones that were devastated with their operation, their grazing operations on the federal forest, because, again, management practices have just been put aside. We're not doing it.
No, you're talking about the grazing. They bring the cows up to the high country in the summertime.
Correct.
Okay.
And you put the cattle up there, you're going to take down the grass, you're going to remove some of the brush, et cetera, and make a better forest. And they do exactly that.
Maybe I ought to put in a few goats as well.
Well, that's for them to do. I wanted to talk briefly about this bottle of water that I have here.
Okay.
I was down in Southern California talking to Metropolitan Water District, who is actually not a water supplier to an individual, but they supply to other water agencies in Southern California. But during that time, we visited not only the Dimere facility, which treats 500 million gallons of water a day, but I also got a chance with Mike Binkler from Utica Water and Power and some other people from the county to go through a RO, a reverse osmosis system that is being currently operated in Orange County. It treats 85% of all of the wastewater in Orange County into drinkable water.
Wow.
And what they're doing is they're re-injecting it in the ground in their 5 subbasins within the area, and also using it as an injection, a pressure injection, to keep the salt water from intruding into the freshwater basin.
Yeah.
So I will tell you the Santa Ana River doesn't flow because it's being used, and they're taking the water back up. They're doing recharging. Southern California has really got it well understood of what their challenges are. The cost per acre foot in Southern California to water this June is about $700 an acre foot. If you talk about what it takes to treat this water with reverse osmosis to drinking water standards,
right,
it's about $1,400 an acre foot. When you talk about the Carlsbad system down there near San Diego, which was part of our discussion, it's about $2,100 an acre foot. What's the cost per acre foot here in Calaveras County in some of our facilities? What are we selling water for? $7 to $10, maybe $12 an acre foot.
Yeah.
There's an imbalance that's occurring.
What does it cost to desalinate?
That's the $1,400. Oh, to drinking water, Carlsbad is $2,100 an acre foot.
$2,100 to turn seawater into drinking water.
Into drinking water. And they feel that it's important to do that because there's a limited amount of resource that's available to them. I understand that the Colorado River is not supplying the level of water that they need to keep the 19 million people in Southern California viable.
Right.
And so their other option is they're going to have to get it either off of the California Water Project or they're going to have to desal. Now, they did bring the desal plant in Santa Barbara back online. So they're using what I call off-the-shelf technology. That's their term of what, for instance, the Israelis have done to make that work and make it work successfully. So they have a number of projects that are in the pipeline right now to go to desal in Southern California.
Now, can that be combined with nuclear power?
Yes. In fact, the one at Carlsbad is side by side with the nuclear plant down there.
I see.
So it's just one of those things that I thought I'd bring with me to show you. And yes, I've already tasted this. It tastes a little stingy, which means they said you had to put a little lime in it to mellow it out.
Or like a vodka tonic?
Yeah, almost like well, okay. But what I gave you something there was a letter to President Trump that I gave to Interior Secretary Zinke when he visited New Melones a couple of months ago. In that letter, I indicated to him the importance that the federal water project, which is separate from the state water project, be in essence off the table when it comes to the California water fix. The California water fix is intended to provide unimpaired flows in February through June. And the Water Board is going to be making a decision here right after the election in November to possibly do exactly that, which means that the water we normally store at Spicer, we normally store at McKay's, and some of the other high country reservoirs will have to be released instead of stored for the purpose of saving fish.
Oh, that's criminal.
I asked the president as well as the Interior Secretary to take a look at this because the federal water project was put in place as a result of the Great Depression to put the Central Valley back to work. That you have contractual obligations to those farmers down there and to us as well because we are impacted by what happens with that project. These are two parallel projects. The federal project and the California Water Project are two separate projects. So the federal water project includes Shasta, New Melones, Folsom, San Luis, and other small reservoirs. The rest of them are in the California Water Project, of which Oroville is one of them.
I understand the federal government had a formula, or still has it, that any major projects have to provide more benefits than the cost. In other words, it can't be a make-work project to put people to work. The resultant improvement needs to generate income that's greater than the expense of creating it.
So let me give you some good news, and that has to do with the Sites Reservoir. SB1, which passed here a couple of years ago, was aimed at providing money for building and constructing new reservoirs. And two of them, Sites and Temperance Flat, were those two reservoirs. And believe it or not, the state for a long time said they don't fit the criteria, and they kept rejecting them. The federal government in the Farm Bill here in August supplied a match, a federal match to the state cost to build sites.
Wow.
And it's going to come off the ground. It will provide about 1.8 million acre feet of off-river storage, about 14 miles north and west of Sacramento. And what that will do, too, is reduce the flooding potential in Sacramento because you can take the flood water and you can take and store it and bring it back online at a different point in time, and also supply approximately 500,000 acre feet of water to ag users up there in the North Valley. But the problem is that the Bay Delta plan, which is the unimpaired flows plan, is going to have to negotiate because some of those water rights holders are going to have to give up a little bit of their water rights to make it happen. So there's going to have to be still some negotiation, and they're hoping by 2020 or 2021 that they'll get all of that done and be able to move forward with the actual construction.
I understand that Tom McClintock, our congressman, agrees with allowing New Melones to actually get full, and for higher priority to the use of the water rather than draining drain the reservoir for fish.
For fish, that's correct. So my letter to the president, I brought forward some points, and it was interesting. It was a week later that Interior Secretary Zinke issued a 7-page scathing letter to the Water Board and basically outlined all of the points that I had put forward.
Cool.
And asked to have the federal side of the projects reviewed, which they are currently under review. Now, they were supposed to have done that within 2 weeks. They have not been able to accomplish it. It is very complex,
right.
But they will come out with their answer. It isn't that they don't want to contribute, that they don't want to cooperate with the state, but they also have to understand the obligations that they also have in place with other water suppliers or users they're in the valley, as well as here in the foothills, whether it's Oakdale Irrigation or South San Joaquin Irrigation, Turlock, Modesto, all of them are impacted by these decisions.
Looking at this a little deeper, I wonder if we're perhaps looking at the trees and not seeing the forest. This movement toward tearing down dams, or if you don't tear them down, make them useless by not retaining water, is part of a long-range plan of reducing the human footprint on the planet. And this seems to be coming not from locally from our local water boards or even the state. It seems to be coming from the UN in the form of UN Agenda 21 and 2030. And it's never mentioned in the newspapers how this program is laid out and how it's being implemented in the state levels, many states, not just California, and also how it's being implemented locally. The key word seems to be sustainability. Sustainability is that kind of word is everybody's in favor of sustainability. It's kind of like apple pie and mother,
Or being in favor of air and water.
Air and water.
It's interesting. We went to Southern California with the Mountain Counties Water Association to talk to the folks down there. I did have a chance to speak briefly with Jeff Keitlinger, who is the general manager of Metropolitan, as well as other major players in the metropolitan system. 3 of them will be in Auburn the end of next month, and we'll be meeting again. The conversation will continue. Why? Because they now understand that if we can improve the watershed, if we can improve the headwaters and the forest health, and they can have a role to play in that, they will benefit as well.
Yeah.
So when we talk about the Bay Delta plan or the California Water Fix, the Water Fix is separate now. That's the twin tunnels. The problem that they're having right now is because when they turn those 11 pumps on at the Clifton Court Forebay near Tracy, they're pulling 10,000 cubic feet per second of water. That's equivalent of draining Lake Tulloch in 2 to 3 days.
Oh, wow.
That's how much water can come out of there. But they pull it so quickly that the rivers reverse. The flow reverses. And the result is they're pulling saline
salt
water from the end of the delta, and that's what's creating this problem. So to get around it, they want to pull us to 2 tunnels, and they've already purchased some islands, not so much to take the islands, but to get the easements across the islands and move their intakes up to above the Cosumnes River on the Sacramento.
I understand that also there's not dams, but river blockages that can change with the tide. In other words, rather than it would retain water when the tide goes down, and then would reduce. These dikes, for lack of a better word, would allow the water to come in during high tide.
Well, here's the greatest fear that I see Metropolitan having, is if the Delta system were to fail, if 1 or 2 islands were to fail, the resultant turbidity and other problems that would occur as a result of that might make the Clifton Court Forebay intake unusable. That is a definite fear.
So the water going to L.A.,
they need a fresher way to get it off. The Sacramento, their primary water right is the Feather River. The Feather River is the Oroville Dam.
Right.
The Sacramento River is their wheeling method of getting that water south. But once it gets into the delta, they have to, in essence, wheel it through the delta and keep it as clean as possible to get it to Clifton Court.
I see.
Well, the problem is, would it be better for them to move the straws somewhere closer onto Sacramento. But when they do that, would that create an additional problem for places like Antioch and Pittsburgh, where you're now going to be pulling North Delta water and reversing flows up there versus reversing them in the South Delta?
Well, we got to think about Calaveras County taxpayers, because this program is taxpayer alert.
And what is this going to cost? I mean, we're talking about $5.1 billion for Sites Reservoir.
That's a lot of money.
Yes. But what is the economic impact of when we drain New Maloney's? What is the economic impact if we drain Spicer? What's the economic impact if NCPA cannot generate power off the North Fork project? You know, what's the economic impact? As I had a threat recently placed to me, is if they drain New Maloney's to that point, Oakdale Irrigation says, well, we'll just drain Lake Tulloch too.
Oh, yeah, great.
So what is it? We have to think about those impacts. Because they are direct and right in our face right now.
What speaking of New Maloney's, there looks like there may be opportunity for further development in New Maloney's, particularly on its west shore. And I understand that there's been some preliminary plans of having boat launches there, and maybe some commercial and some other things. And have you heard anything about that?
You can go on the media, and I know Russ Thomas was looking at this. There's been other efforts on it.
Russ Thomas, the former supervisor, and had a presentation to the board on that topic.
Yeah, and as well as now on CCWD. The point is that my discussion is not with the Army Corps directly in Sacramento. My discussion is with Austin Ewell, with the as Undersecretary of Interior,
right.
and let the desire come from the top down rather than try to drive it from the bottom up.
Well, that makes sense,
So,
especially if there's friendliness towards free enterprise and property rights.
Well, Austin used to live in Copperopolis.
Well, that's a good thing.
And he is a water rights attorney as well, so he understands the challenges that we're facing on that issue here.
Right.
But we need to get more visitor use days. Lake Tulloch is a heavily used lake.
Yeah.
There's more boats, there's more use on it than it really should have the capacity to handle. So I'm working with Tuolumne County, as well as the staff in the counties, our two counties, to start to put together some kind of policy statements on a basin authority, or a JPA if you want to call it that, but more of a basin authority as to how to operate Lake Tulloch.
Apparently, it was discovered that the overcrowding of Lake Tulloch is self-regulatory.
It is.
It is. When people say, "Hey, there's too many," they go to New Maloney's, and sometimes they go to Don Pedro.
So we're discussing what's I'm trying to think of the name of the lake up there. Near Fresno, but Bass Lake plan. We're looking at that as one of the options that's been brought up many times, not only by the counties but our marine safety officers as well, that might be an option. But what is a longer-term solution? Get more visitor use days on New Maloney's.
We certainly agree, and I think the Copperopolis Area Business Association also agrees.
Okay. And
I'm a director on that one.
But Copperopolis is getting some business. There's a possibility of another store coming in. I don't know if you heard about it.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Also, I'm looking forward to that wonderful little project in the town square of being complete with more shopping and a motel and maybe a conference center and some other things. I
really can't speak to it at this time, but I will tell you I'm very upbeat over the concept of getting town square to the state that it was envisioned to be.
Yeah.
And I think that will really invigorate the economy for the whole community.
What a wonderful blend. Well, Supervisor Dennis Mills.
Are we out of time?
We're down to our last minute. And in a nutshell, what should the taxpayers be concerned about coming up?
Wow, big question.
Only 2 sentences.
There's so much going on. We now have an economic development coordinator that's actively involved in helping to build our economy. We have an OES director that has helped to resolve a lot of our OES issues. We have a new person. There's a lot going on.
Thank you for being our guest.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time. Thank you for watching.